The night an empath dares to put themselves first, something almost seismic trembles inside. It feels like the floor of the soul shifting, a quake rearranging what once seemed immovable. Survival, though hard-earned, is not a finish line. It is a threshold. It opens into a territory where what you thought was poison might yet become medicine. Jung named the shadow, the denied, hidden, disowned part of the psyche, and projection, the act of hurling those disowned pieces into others. For the empath, these forces weave tightly with daily life. You carry feelings that are not yours, shame that was never born inside you, rage that you did not choose. The first act of daring to put yourself in the center cracks the old shell. That crack is frightening, but also the beginning of freedom. Imagine walking down a dim corridor, the air thick with unspoken grief. A single lamp flickers ahead. That is the moment we begin. A passage between the old identity, absorbing everything, and the new possibility, standing as mirror instead of sponge. If you have ever carried another's unspoken wound as if it were your own, let this story invite you to set that burden down. Tonight, the journey begins with acknowledgement. Surviving the narcissist's darkness did not end you. It unveiled you. This is where the empath discovers that living only as a container for others leads to dissolution. Jung would call this the pull of individuation, the drive of the psyche to form a whole, even if it must break what was fragile. The empath who has survived has already walked through corridors of projection, has already shouldered the despair of another until their own outline blurred. Yet now the question rises: who do you become once the burden is put down? Here the archetypes gather. The wounded healer whispers, "What hurt you can be healed in others." The shadow looms, reminding you that what you denied now stands before you. The persona, the mask you wore to keep peace, slips, revealing a face lined by both pain and wisdom. You are no longer just an empath. You are the crucible of alchemy. To those watching, let me pause. Where are you listening from, and at what hour of your day? Leave a comment below. Your presence is part of this circle, and if this story already resonates, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you won't miss the next step in our shared exploration here on Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled. Now, breathe. This is not merely a tale of wounds, but of transfiguration. We will move step by step, from the act of absorption, through the dissolving of old identity, into the alchemy of fire, onward to discernment, then to integration, and finally to vocation. Each stage is a turning, each turning a chance to become more whole. The shattered beginning is not a ruin, it is the seedbed. Where darkness was poured in, light is forged. What looked like the end was never the end. It was the opening. It was the summons. And it leads us now into the second stage, the descent into the underworld, where the empath confronts the deepest night of the soul. The descent does not arrive with a polite knock. It swallows. For the empath entangled with a narcissist, what begins as subtle erosion soon becomes collapse. You have been absorbing blame, shame, anger, like drinking from a poisoned well day after day. At first you rationalize. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe if you love harder, peace will return. But the deeper you drink, the less of you remains. Jung might say the self insists on wholeness, and when the conscious ego cannot carry the imbalance, it drives you downward into the unconscious, the underworld. In this underworld, the empath feels stripped of identity. What you once believed were your own feelings prove to be borrowed weights. Dreams reveal grotesque banquets where food turns to ash, or mirrors that show no reflection. These are not mere nightmares. They are psychic messages. They signal the death of the false self that survived by accommodation. Dissolution is underway. The body feels it too. Exhaustion that no sleep relieves, anxiety buzzing under the skin, a sense that even silence is loud. This stage is terrifying because it is subtraction without promise of addition. You are emptied, but not yet filled. You stand in what alchemists called nigredo, the blackening. Everything familiar decays, and it seems there is nothing to replace it. Yet Jung, interpreting alchemy as a mirror for individuation, reminds us that blackness is not annihilation, but preparation. Seeds must break in the dark soil before they can reach for light. Here lies the archetypal night of the soul. The empath may feel abandoned, but this abandonment is paradoxically the beginning of return. It is Persephone being pulled into Hades' realm, not as punishment, but as initiation. It is the shamanic underworld journey, to die before dying, so that life may be reborn truer. The narcissist's projections, blame, superiority, hunger for control, were absorbed until you could not distinguish self from shadow. In this descent, the empath finally meets the limits of absorption. No vessel can carry infinite poison without cracking. Let us pause and translate this descent into a more ordinary image. Imagine standing at a crowded train station. Voices everywhere. Each person hands you a suitcase, and you accept them all. Soon your arms buckle, you stagger, you fall. That collapse is the descent. It feels like failure, but it is the inevitable consequence of trying to carry what was never yours. In collapsing, you learn the truth. The only way forward is to stop lifting what does not belong to you. The underworld also strips illusions. Here, the empath begins to see the narcissist not as a godlike force, but as a mask covering deep fractures. This is crucial. You are not in the underworld merely to suffer, but to recognize. What you absorbed was never essence, only shadow. And shadows, once seen, begin to lose their grip. Jung observed that when the unconscious erupts, it feels overwhelming but carries meaning. The dissolution of the empath's old self is not meaningless chaos. It is a summons to reorganize life around authenticity instead of appeasement. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels like annihilation. But the pain is the breaking open of a shell too small for the soul you are becoming. At this stage, many feel tempted to turn to stone, to swear never again, with a bitterness that hardens into armor. But the descent is not asking you to petrify. It asks you to let the false dissolve so the true may emerge. Think of water washing away clay from a hidden statue. You are not vanishing. You are being revealed. If you are listening now and recognizing this underworld in your own life, know this. The fact that you can see it means you are already more than it. To witness is to step out of entanglement. Leave a comment if you've ever felt the blackening season, when everything familiar fell apart. Your sharing might be a lantern for another traveler. The empath's descent into the underworld is painful, but it is not punishment. It is passage. It is the dark womb of rebirth. From here, the narrative will shift. What has been dissolved must meet fire. What was poison must be placed in the furnace. In the next stage, we move into the alchemy of transformation, where suffering is not discarded, but transmuted. The underworld does not end you. It delivers you to the forge. The furnace is lit. After the descent strips away the old skin, the empath is not left empty, but placed into fire. Alchemists called this stage calcinatio, the burning that purifies. For the empath, it feels like every memory, every absorbed wound, every distortion of self is pulled into the flames. This is not comfortable. It is searing. Yet it is here in the heat of alchemy that the poison begins its slow metamorphosis into medicine. What does this fire look like in lived experience? Sometimes it is anger, finally felt after years of suppression. Sometimes it is grief, allowed to pour out without censor. Sometimes it is clarity, sudden and sharp, that whispers, "This was never mine to carry." The empath learns to sit with the intensity instead of fleeing. Jung wrote that individuation demands confrontation with opposites. Here, the opposite of empathic passivity emerges, active engagement with the shadow. The empath does not just absorb anymore, they metabolize. The metaphor of poison is apt. Imagine holding venom in a vial. Before you drank it without question. Now you study it. You recognize its properties. You ask what antidote might come from the same source. In certain traditions, the very venom that kills can also heal when used in the right dose. Likewise, the empath's intimate familiarity with deception, manipulation, and projection becomes a radar for truth. Their pain sharpens discernment, but the alchemy is not purely intellectual. It is embodied. Rage once feared now burns as a boundary signal, a flare saying too much. Shame once suffocating is reinterpreted. This shame does not belong to me. Grief once endless becomes a river carrying old selves downstream, making space for new growth. The fire consumes illusions, but it does not consume the soul. Instead, it tempers it, like steel forged in flame. Here we recall Jung's insight. The unconscious holds not only darkness, but also potential. By facing the poison, the empath discovers hidden gold. That gold is not naive optimism. It is tempered compassion. Compassion that does not erase the self, but includes it. It is wisdom that can name projection when it appears. It is the ability to sit with suffering without drowning in it. A dream might appear at this stage. Standing in a forest, clearing at night, a cauldron bubbling in the center. Into it go fragments of memory, shouted accusations, moments of gaslighting, hours of silent despair. The empath watches as the cauldron glows, transforming fragments into light that floats upward like fireflies. This dream is not fantasy. It is psyche showing that what once tormented can illuminate. The fire also teaches responsibility. To alchemize poison into medicine, the empath must avoid two traps: denial and obsession. Denial says, "It never happened." Obsession says, "It is all that ever happened." The middle path is to honor the pain without being defined by it. This is delicate work, but it is the work of the alchemist. Pause here with me. Can you recall a moment when rage, grief, or shame, emotions you once feared, became signals of clarity instead of threats? Share if you wish. Your story can spark recognition for others walking this furnace path. What emerges from the flames is not perfection, but discernment. The empath begins to sense, almost viscerally, when something is off. Manipulative flattery no longer seduces. Subtle shaming no longer slides under the radar. Boundaries form not as rigid walls, but as living fences, flexible yet firm. Compassion remains, but now it has edges. You can still care, but you cannot be consumed. Alchemy, then, is not escape from the poison, but transformation through it. The empath carries scars, yes, but those scars glow as reminders of what has been survived and what has been transmuted. This stage is the hinge, from endless absorption to active discernment. And discernment leads us into the next gift, the literacy of shadows, the radar that sees beneath appearances. From the furnace emerges not only survival, but a new kind of sight. The empath who once absorbed shadows unconsciously now learns to read them consciously. This is shadow literacy, the ability to discern what belongs to the self, what belongs to another, and what floats in the shared air between. Where before the empath was an open sponge, now they become a mirror, reflecting, not absorbing. Consider how this shift unfolds in daily life. An empath who once silenced themselves in the face of criticism now hears the hidden projection in the words. They recognize this attack reveals more about the other than about me. What once pierced becomes information. They no longer mistake poison for nourishment. In Jungian terms, they begin to develop what he called discrimination, the careful separation of self from shadow. This literacy does not come cheaply. It is the dividend of suffering. Having known manipulation firsthand, the empath develops an inner radar, flattery that is too sweet, apologies that feel empty, promises with no weight. These now vibrate as warnings. The empath's body, once a receptacle for pain, becomes an instrument of detection. What once overwhelmed now alerts. Here compassion matures. It is no longer the indiscriminate compassion that erases boundaries, but compassion with edges. Picture a candle inside a lantern. The flame still glows, but the glass protects it from being extinguished by every gust of wind. The empath remains capable of warmth, but now the warmth is directed, not exploited. This is a crucial pivot. Empathy that includes the self. Dreams often signal this stage. A common motif might be a forest mirror, chains dissolving as the empath gazes. The reflection no longer vanishes, it stabilizes. Or perhaps an ocean dream. Waters once threatening to drown now lift the dreamer, carrying them effortlessly. Such imagery confirms that the psyche itself acknowledges the transition from victimhood to discernment. This stage also carries a subtle danger: cynicism. Having seen behind masks, the empath may be tempted to distrust everyone. But shadow literacy is not blanket suspicion. It is calibrated awareness. It allows trust when evidence supports it, and caution when red flags appear. The task is to balance openness with discernment, avoiding the extremes of naive gullibility and bitter mistrust. Pause for a moment. Have you ever noticed your body sense a lie before your mind caught it? That gut tightening, that subtle contraction. This is shadow literacy at work. Comment below if you've had such moments. Your example might resonate with others learning to trust their radar. In practice, this literacy leads to healthier relationships. The empath no longer volunteers as a scapegoat. They no longer carry the blame another refuses to own. Instead, they return responsibility to its source, sometimes gently, sometimes firmly. A phrase as simple as, "That is yours, not mine," becomes a shield. The empath's presence itself begins to challenge others. Because when you no longer absorb projections, the projector must face their own shadow. Some resist, some attack, but some awaken. In this way, the empath's discernment serves not only personal survival but collective evolution. The mirror you hold unsettles, but it also heals. Jung believed individuation was not just for the individual, but for the world. When one person withdraws projections, others are forced into honesty. The empath, once drowning in borrowed darkness, becomes a quiet catalyst of truth. Their very stance, compassionate yet bounded, creates ripples of transformation. This is the gift of surviving the furnace. Not only your own freedom, but a presence that calls others to face themselves. From here, the journey deepens inward again. To refine this literacy, The empath must turn toward the hardest mirror of all, the one that reveals not only others' shadows, but their own. This is where we move next, into the confrontation with the inner narcissist, the savior complex, the hidden hunger within. Every story of survival eventually turns inward. Having gained the ability to read shadows outside, the empath is summoned to face the shadows within. This is the most difficult task, because it requires stripping away not only illusions about others, but also illusions about oneself. The empath, so accustomed to identifying as the good one, the helper, the healer, must now ask, what in me mirrors the very narcissism I escaped? At first, this feels like betrayal. After all, the empath has carried pain, endured manipulation, and borne witness to cruelty. But Jung reminds us that the shadow is universal. To individuate is to accept that the qualities we most despise in others live, in some form, within us. For the empath, this means recognizing the subtle ways they too may crave control, seek validation, or perform saviorhood. The line between care and control can blur, especially when helping others becomes an identity rather than a choice. Consider the savior complex. How often has the empath rushed to rescue? Not because the other truly asked, but because their own fear of abandonment demanded it. How often has saying yes been less about generosity and more about avoiding rejection? These patterns, though different in tone from narcissistic dominance, still revolve around the same axis: fear of being unloved, unseen, or unworthy. To confront this is humbling. It means admitting that even the role of the wounded healer can carry ego inflation. Jung wrote that the danger of the healer is to hide behind their function, using it as armor against their own vulnerability. For the empath, the confrontation with the inner narcissist dissolves this armor. The recognition hurts, but it also frees. A dream at this stage might present a banquet of masks. Each mask, when lifted, reveals not a stranger but the dreamer's own face. Angry, ashamed, proud, needy. At first, horror, then understanding. These masks are not enemies, but exiled parts of the self. The task is not to destroy them, but to integrate them. By welcoming these pieces, the empath becomes less susceptible to projection and more rooted in authenticity. Here lies another paradox. The very narcissist the empath fled becomes an unlikely teacher. By enduring that relationship, the empath was forced to see dynamics of control and hunger for validation in sharp relief. Now, by turning inward, they realize those dynamics are not alien. They are human. They exist in seed form within everyone. To acknowledge this is not to excuse abuse. It is to claim wholeness. Integration is a slow process. It looks like pausing before offering help and asking, am I giving freely or am I buying love? It looks like admitting, part of me wants to be admired, without letting that desire dictate action. It looks like refusing to paint oneself as purely victim or purely savior. The empath learns to live in complexity. Pause with me. Think of a time you helped someone, only to feel resentment later. Was it generosity, or was it obligation wrapped in empathy? Sharing moments like this, if you feel called, helps others recognize their own hidden motivations. Comment if you have seen this in yourself. It may give courage to someone else. When the empath integrates the inner narcissist, a strange thing happens. Freedom grows. No longer bound to prove worth through sacrifice, no longer ensnared in cycles of rescuing, the empath can choose when and how to love. Love becomes spacious, not grasping. Boundaries become natural, not forced. The self is no longer split between good empath and bad narcissist. Both are acknowledged, balanced, and harnessed for growth. Jung taught that wholeness includes light and shadow. By facing the inner narcissist, the empath moves closer to that wholeness. The mirror no longer shows only the wounds inflicted by others. It also reflects the subtle distortions within. This reflection, though painful, is the ground of true authenticity. And so, the empath stands at a new threshold. Having seen both the outer narcissist and the inner echo, they are ready for rebirth. Not as sponge, not as savior, but as something new. Tender yet fierce. Able to love without erasing themselves. This is the next turning of the journey, where softness and strength finally join hands. The rebirth of the empath is not a gentle return to innocence. It is a tempered awakening. Having faced both the outer narcissist and the inner reflection, the empath emerges neither bitter nor naive. Instead, they embody a paradox, tender yet fierce. This balance is the sign of transformation. The heart remains open, but the spine is unbreakable. At this stage, many survivors feel the temptation to harden permanently. Never again, they vow, erecting walls so high no one can enter. But a life encased in stone is no life at all. Jung warned that repression of the shadow only ensures its return in distorted form. The empath learns that to calcify into cynicism would be to let the abuser's legacy govern their future. True rebirth means saying yes to life again, but this time on different terms. What does this rebirth look like in practice? It is the willingness to risk vulnerability while maintaining boundaries. It is offering kindness without self-erasure. It is letting anger speak as a guide rather than a tyrant. Think of the lion, strong enough to defend, but still tender with its cubs. This is the empath reborn, no longer prey, no longer captive, but sovereign in their own territory. A dream may accompany this stage, a phoenix rising from ash, its wings scarred but radiant. The scars do not diminish the beauty, they deepen it. Or perhaps the dream is of a garden once overrun, now enclosed by a simple fence. Flowers bloom again because the fence, far from being prison, provides protection. These images speak of the empath's rebirth, life renewed through boundaries, beauty preserved through discernment. Compassion in this phase carries new weight. It is not pity, nor is it martyrdom. It is the recognition that all beings carry shadows, yet not all are safe to hold close. The empath can say, "I wish you healing," while stepping away. They can say, "I love you," without surrendering their dignity. This is compassion matured, tested in fire, guarded by wisdom. Here lies the fierce tenderness Jung might describe as integration, the marriage of opposites. Softness without strength dissolves. Strength without softness isolates. Together, they create wholeness. The empath's life no longer swings between extremes of absorption and withdrawal. Instead, it steadies into a rhythm, open and closed, giving and withholding, yes and no. Pause with me now. If you have ever felt yourself harden after betrayal, only to long later for softness again, you know this paradox. Tender yet fierce. Comment below with a single word that captures your rebirth, whether it's lion, phoenix, or something entirely your own. Your word may give language to another's silent transformation. The world often misunderstands this rebirth. To some, you may seem colder, less available, less endlessly accommodating. But this is not cruelty, it is truth. Your boundaries no longer bend until they break. Your yes carries integrity because your no is firm. This integrity confuses those who once benefited from your self-erasure. yet it also draws those who are ready for real connection. The empath reborn is no longer defined by survival. They live, love, and choose actively. They are not afraid to step back from those who drain them, nor afraid to step forward where presence matters. This is not neutrality. It is sovereignty. They are no longer swept away by every tide. They are the lighthouse on the shore. This stage sets the ground for the final turning. Rebirth is not only for the self, it prepares the empath for vocation. Having become tender yet fierce, they are ready to stand as lantern for others. Their light is not desperate to save, but steady enough to guide. From here, the path opens into service, the calling to live as witness and mirror for the world. The journey comes to its final turn, vocation. Having walked through absorption, dissolution, fire, discernment, and inner confrontation, the empath stands reborn. But the story does not end in private triumph. It extends outward into the world. Jung described individuation not only as a personal task, but as a service to the collective psyche. When one person integrates shadow and light, they become a living symbol that others unconsciously recognize. This is the empath's vocation, to be lantern, not sponge. The lantern does not chase ships in the night. It does not beg them to follow. It simply shines, steady against storms, its presence a point of orientation. Likewise, the empath no longer exhausts themselves trying to fix, rescue, or absorb. Instead, they embody presence. Their very way of being, a balance of compassion and boundaries, serves as guidance. Some will be drawn, some will resist, but the light remains constant. This vocation is not glamorous. It may not even be noticed by most. But in small moments, it ripples. A boundary spoken kindly inspires another to do the same. A refusal to absorb blame forces someone else to confront their own shadow. A simple act of listening without self-erasure models a healthier way to love. These subtle acts matter more than dramatic rescues, for they seed change at the level of the everyday. Dreams often affirm this calling. Perhaps an ocean carries the dreamer effortlessly, no longer a drowning threat, but a cradle of support. Or a lantern glows in the night forest, drawing lost travelers without words. Such dreams speak of vocation not as burden but as gift, the psyche's confirmation that living authentically is already service. It is important here to recall the caution. The empath must not build a new identity solely on survival. If they become defined only as the one who endured, they risk living in reaction rather than creation. True vocation arises not from clinging to scars, but from letting scars teach discernment. The empath's story is no longer about the narcissist's darkness. It is about the light they forged within it. Pause and reflect. Who in your life has been a lantern, a steady presence whose authenticity gave you courage? And in what ways are you becoming that lantern for others, even quietly? Share below if you feel moved. Your presence may remind someone else that their light matters. In vocation, the empath accepts that they are not here to save everyone. They are here to live truthfully, to mirror reality, to embody wholeness. This does not make them saints. It makes them human, deeply so. They can say no without guilt, yes without fear, and I am without apology. This authenticity itself is gift enough. Thus, the journey concludes where it began, with a paradox. Survival was not the end. Darkness was not only destruction. The empath becomes not victim, not savior, but lantern, an ordinary yet radiant presence. Their vocation is not to carry the world's wounds, but to shine steadily enough that others may dare to face their own. And so, the story does not close but opens. For individuation is never finished. Each day is another turn of the wheel, absorbing, discerning, integrating anew. The empath's vocation is simply to keep the lantern lit, not with frenzy, not with exhaustion, but with steady human flame. From here, we move into the final epilogue, a closing reflection that gathers the treasures of this journey, a reminder of the boon carried home, and an invitation for you, the listener, to take a step of your own. You have walked the path step by step. The empath shattered, dissolved, burned, tempered, humbled, reborn, and finally standing as lantern. The story has been long, but the arc is simple. What was once poison has become medicine. What was once victimhood has become vocation. In Jung's language, this is individuation, the weaving together of shadow and light into a wholeness that serves not only the self, but the world. Think back to where we began. Survival was framed as paradox, not an ending, but a doorway. Through that doorway, you entered descent, the underworld where identity dissolved. You faced fire, and in the furnace you learned that rage, grief, and shame could be transmuted. You emerged with new gifts: radar for deception, compassion with edges, the ability to discern shadows without being consumed. You looked inward, confronting the hidden narcissist within, breaking free from saviorhood and fear of abandonment. And at last, you were reborn, tender and fierce, able to hold love without erasure. From there, the path opened outward, into vocation, into lanternhood. The treasure gathered from this journey is not abstract. It is discernment, the ability to know what is yours and what is not. It is freedom, the power to say no without apology, and yes without fear. It is authenticity, the courage to stand in the statement, I am. These are not dramatic fireworks. They are steady flames, quiet and durable, like the lantern in the storm. The reconciliation of light and shadow is perhaps the most profound gift. You no longer need to deny the darkness or flee from it. You see that darkness has its place, its lessons, its weight. It no longer defines you, but it informs you. Likewise, the light you carry is no longer fragile or naive. It is tested, seasoned, and capable of guiding others. This union of opposites, shadow and light, softness and strength, compassion and boundaries, is the hallmark of wholeness. Now comes the invitation. Individuation is not finished by listening to a story. It continues through action, however small. Take one step today. Choose a boundary you will honor, even if it trembles on your lips, or sit for 10 minutes in silence, listening for the voice beneath the noise. Or write 3 lines from your dreams tomorrow morning, honoring the messages of your psyche. Each small act is a continuation of the alchemy you have already begun. Imagine yourself now as that lantern. You do not need to force your light onto anyone. You need only to remain steady. Those who are ready will find you. Those who are not will pass by. Either way, your flame remains, neither diminished nor inflated by others. This is the quiet strength of vocation, not saving the world, but being a presence of truth within it. And so we close with this blessing. You are no longer the sponge who drowns in the feelings of others. You are no longer defined by what the narcissist poured into you. You are the mirror that reflects truth, the lantern that steadies in storms, the flame that whispers, I am. If this journey touched you, let it ripple outward. Share one boundary you will keep today in the comments. Subscribe and ring the bell so you can continue this unfolding with us on Carl Jung's Stories Unveiled. And above all, remember, Individuation is not a single event, but a rhythm, a way of living. Each day is another chance to integrate, to illuminate, to stand as yourself. Carry the light. Carry the truth. Carry the quiet strength of being whole.